Welcome, everybody. This is Carl Griffith from Graybar, and I want to thank you for attending our G2 Talk webinar this month, where we'll discuss the future of structured cabling systems. This should be a great topic for all of us, folks in the Graybar comm data business as well as our customers. Structured cabling systems are near and dear to our heart, and the information that will be imparted today should be useful to all of us in our jobs and our businesses as we go about our work. So welcome. Before we get started, I'd like to provide a little bit of information about Graybar so you know who we are if this is your first time with us or you're not familiar with us. But Graybar is a national distributor of electrical and communications products with over 240 locations in North America. Graybar helps our customers power, network, and secure their facilities or buildings with speed, intelligence, and efficiency. And that's exactly what we'll talk about today. We're going to talk about structured cabling systems from the power perspective, from the networks perspective, and from the security perspective. We will talk about that, and the discussions will talk about the speed and the efficiency and the intelligence of these networks that we construct. Another aspect of Graybar is how we think about things in terms of the building and the building life cycle. We think about buildings in terms of construction, maintaining, and renovating. And all of these aspects, whether you're building, maintaining, or renovating a building, require communications infrastructure that we can help you with. For those of you that are lucky enough to be one of the first 50 people on this webinar, and you stick with us through the presentation, you're going to be the recipient of a free cup of coffee on Graybar. So check your email, and there'll be a certificate in there that you can exchange for a cup of coffee at a local national coffee chain. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little button down there that says Q&A, and so we will have a Q&A or question and answer period at the end of this presentation. As we go through the presentation, please type your question into the dialog box and send it our way, and at the end we'll review those questions, and our speakers and myself will help you answer those questions. The entire presentation will be archived on graybar.com. If you go to the Graybar logo on Graybar's homepage at graybar.com, you'll see the G2 Talk logo there. There's a little section there that says archive. If you click on it, you can go back to this presentation or any of the G2 Talk webinars that we've done and download them, or you could copy the URL and send them to your colleagues or friends. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. Our hosts today are from General Cable. First, I'd like to introduce Matt Gentile. Matt's a product manager for Datacom products at General Cable. He has 5 years of industry experience at General Cable. He told me a little earlier that he's a tortured Bengals fan. I'm sorry you didn't make the Super Bowl this year, Matt. He's a graduate of Xavier University. Along with Matt will be Matt's colleague, James Malcolmus. He's a graduate of Purdue as a mechanical engineer. He's the manager of product development in the Datacom division at General Cable. He has 15 years worth of industry experience. Both Matt and James will be at Dixie in Orlando, Florida next month, and if you would like to have further conversations with Matt and James, they'll be there at the General Cable booth, or you can come by the Graybar booth and talk to us there, and we'll get you in touch with Matt and James if you'd like to have a continued discussion about the future of structured cabling systems in our world. So, without any further delays, I would like to pass the presentation on to our friends from General Cable, Matt and James. Matt, it's your turn.
Thanks, Carl. Good morning, and good morning, everyone. Excited about talking with you today, and especially appreciative of everyone who's joined the webinar, taking time out of your busy schedule to listen to what we have to say. So, like Carl said, we're going to be talking about the future of structured cabling systems today. When you think about the structured cable market, as anyone who's close to it knows, it's gone through tremendous change over the past 20 years. It's an exciting market, a dynamic market. There's pockets of growth, pockets of decline, new technologies. It's an exciting industry, but there's a lot going on. So what we wanted to do is start off by looking at some things that we consider facts, some things that we believe everyone would roughly agree with or intuitively feel. First fact, nearly 90% of all commercial users use a copper category solution as their main choice to deliver data to the desktop. Second, copper cabling has been on the decline since 2006. Third, wireless LAN connections, which do require less copper cabling, have tripled in the past 5 years, and they're reaching 80% of the installed Ethernet base. Fourth, despite superior transmission speeds, fiber has only reached 5% penetration in the horizontal market. And last, PoE has grown and will continue to grow with applications such as HDBaseT, Nurse Call, and others that pull more power. So those are some pretty disparate things, some exciting things going on in the market. So what we wanted to do is understand what all of those things going on mean for the next decade of structured cabling. So over the last couple of years, in 2012 and again in 2013, we pulsed the market. We wanted to reach our customers, contractors, users, system designers, a pretty broad cross-section of the structured market, and understand what's going on and how that's going to shape the future. Before we jump in, just a little bit more on what we did and who we reached out to. First thing we did, we reached out to construction, installation, and maintenance and conducted a couple of surveys. 200 people responded. The responders ranged from contractors, users, system designers, pretty good cross-section. Second, we wanted to validate those results through kind of a separate but somewhat overlapping data point. We looked at our own customer base and validated some of these results with another survey. Kind of the second category of information we're going to be sharing with you today is market information. So you might be familiar with Burroughs, which is a quarterly compilation of data that the major manufacturers provide to understand the size of the market. And then finally, we did some work kind of independently looking at company websites, press releases, and other independent market research that had been done. So what did we find? I'm a big fan of telling you what I'm going to tell you in the beginning and then walking you through. To jump to the conclusion, we think that the future of structured cabling is stable and strong. The inertia of the installed base, which we'll tell you about in a little bit, as well as enabling devices that are enabling technologies that are just coming out now, are going to offset some of the organic decline to newer technologies such as wireless and fiber. So overall, General Cable feels that the market's going to remain stable in that flat to -1 or -2% growth rate for the foreseeable future. So before we get into the future, let's look a little at the past. You kind of have to understand where you've been to understand where you're going. This is just a quick snapshot of the premise cable market over the last 15 years or so. It's interesting that the market saw pretty steady growth for the decade of the 90s and into the early 2000s and peaked at just over 7 billion feet in 2005. And this is total copper category sales in North America. After the peak in 2005, we saw a decline all the way to the bottom in 2009, and that's when we were in the middle of the economic crisis, and then a bit of a rebound, and it has been remarkably consistent at around 5 billion feet over the last 4 or 5 years. There's been movement between categories, up the chain, down the chain, and we'll share that with you in a second, but it really is remarkable that the market has been so stable. One of the things we wanted to do was, kind of validate everyone's gut feel, and that is the overall health of the economy is going to be one of the main drivers of the size of the market. So we looked at a couple of leading economic indicators, NASDAQ, which is, kind of a bellwether for how the technology sector is doing, and then the ABI, the Architectural Billings Index, which is a gauge of new construction starts. Both of those track tremendously consistently with the size of the copper category market. So I think this is really just validating what everyone probably intuitively feels and knows, that when the economy is humming, When non-resi construction is booming, then we feel that all in our business as well. One of the other themes that we like to touch on is really the resiliency of the premise cable market. And so what we're showing you here is the breakdown of that market data based on category. Might be kind of hard to read on the chart, but this is the breakdown between Cat 3, Cat 5, 5E, 6, and 6A going back over the last 15 years. It's really interesting how 10 or 12 years ago, that big red bar, which was 5 or 5E, made up about 75% of the volume sold in the structured cable market. Cat 3 back at that time was 15 or 20% of the market. And Cat 6 was only about 10%. So you fast forward just 10 or 12 years and Cat 3 has basically disappeared. The majority of the market has shifted up from 5 to 6. And over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen the emergence of the 10 gig solution 6A. So to me, this really shows how the cable industry has continued to innovate, to keep up with technology, developing products that are keeping up with data demands. It's a resilient industry. So where do those last 10 or 12 years of market evolution lead us? In other words, what's the lay of the land today? We wanted to ask our customer base and a broad cross-section of users and contractors, what does their current physical infrastructure use to get data to the end user? And the results kind of validated what we all know and feel. 80% of the market is made up between Cat 5 and Cat 6. That's the inertia I mentioned before. Even though Cat 6 has been growing fast, it still only constitutes less than 10% of the market. And those higher bandwidth solutions, fiber and wireless, are only around 10 or 12%. So I think this speaks to really the status of the installed base today and the capabilities of those solutions. And the other thing to notice here, and we'll touch on this a little bit further, before upgrading to a fiber or wireless solution, there's a very large segment of the market, that half that's still using a 5E solution, that has a couple of steps to go before they go to a fiber or wireless. So I think that just speaks to the ability of copper to continue to provide data at the speeds and the bandwidths that users require. So that's kind of the end of call it the book report or the history section of what we did. We wanted to kind of quickly pivot and try to figure out what all that means for the future. We started off by looking at wireless. This is another one that might be kind of hard to read. I apologize about that. But what we're looking at here is the growth in devices, kind of half history, half projection. The big red line that kind of jumps off the page is smartphones. So this shows that in 2013, 2014, there's between 1 billion and 2 billion smartphones around the world. And this is just going to grow at astronomical rates. The green line down at the bottom is tablets. That's going to continue to grow as well. The growth in PCs is going to be much more moderate. So what this really shows is that, as we've got there on the slide, the proliferation of more advanced end-user devices is really driving that pull for data. And it's interesting, this chart is about a year and a half old. I think if you actually had to redraw the red line, it'd be even steeper. I think the growth has been even more dramatic than we would have thought a couple of years ago. So what does that mean in terms of data and how that gets to the user? Well, we've seen a pretty gradual but consistent shift from hardwired to mobile data consumption. The top line, the one that's going down, is desktop consumption of data, and the bottom is mobile. It's been a very consistent switch. If we kind of had to throw a peg, it looks like that crossover point when mobile consumption is going to be on par with consumption at the desktop is going to be, I'd say probably sometime in 2016 or 2017. So that really is the trend. That's the history for what we've seen in wireless. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to James, who's going to talk about what that means for the future.
All right, so probably obviously our question now is how does the wireless proliferation impact copper structured cabling? So first I want to talk about some of the standards and then kind of the current state of wireless. So all of you know the first standard for 802.11 came out about 1999, and about every 3 to 5 years they've increased the speed of wireless, and right now we're at 802.11 AC, which came out last year. That talks about that has capabilities up to 1 gigabit per second and even faster. Devices for those came out a couple years before that. Obviously, the goal of the AC was to get it to where it's pretty comparable to what you use on structured cabling in your home, in your office, wherever you might use it. And as you can see that they're in the next 5 years, they're already working on the next standard, which is the AX standard, which can go up to and maybe even including 10 or faster than 10 gigabits per second. Obviously, the goal is to keep up with all the consumers' demands for more data, more faster video, all these things that you want to put over wireless that we're already putting over copper cabling. So obviously, the capability of wireless is quickly approaching our capability in copper cable. Another fact is if you run wireless to your desktop, you're not going to use as much copper as we traditionally do. So how does this impact us? So we asked our customers some of these questions. As you can see, we asked, when did you envision going wireless to your desktop? And as you can see with the more than 5 years or never, that 60% of people don't see soon going to wireless to your desktop. So what are the reasons for those? As probably most of you know, it's security and speed, reliability. If you look at the next question that we asked people, why do you think wireless isn't going to your desktop? And as can be expected, those were the answers. So then the next question is, what speed would it take for you to go wireless to your desktop? And again, it might be, I hope you can read this, but you can see that people would like it to be 100 megabits or 1 gigabit per second. Basically, they want copper speed at your desktop. If you could get that with wireless and you could get it reliably, people would put wireless to the desktop. So then we ask people, what are you actually getting if you're using wireless? And again, it might be a little bit hard to see, but in the middle of that, they're getting anywhere from less than a megabit per second up to maybe 100 megabit per second, which from those of us in the copper world, those are speeds we were talking about a few years ago. And a lot of this, obviously, this survey was from 2013. With the proliferation of AC, you should expect this to start to improve, where we're starting to get above 100 megabits. So you should still see this start to improve in the future. So what does this mean to us? Obviously, wireless is growing. Wireless is growing very quickly. As their capability gets faster and faster, you're going to see the capabilities improve. Obviously, we think that copper cable still remains a viable solution because of reliability, because of environmental concerns when you install them, the security concerns that have to be addressed with wireless. How do you deal with visitors in your building? How do you deal with different levels of security within your organization? A lot of people on this call are experts at installing copper-based solutions, and we may not yet be experts at making good wireless, robust environments. So, although less is wired to the desktop, or when you use wireless, you won't use as much cable. We do think that in the future you're going to need maybe different cable that is installed right now. Obviously, if you're going to get over 1 gigabit per second, you're going to need more than a 1GBaseT solution. So that may require higher category cable in the future. So combining all these factors, we expect a downward pressure of around 3% per year based on wireless growth alone. And we'll talk about how that adds up at the end.
So the next thing we wanted to look at, which is kind of a consequence of wireless, is how the data gets to the desktop computer itself, so drops. The perception might be that as wireless grows, we should see a decrease in the need for cable and therefore drops. So what we did is we asked the same set of users over two different years, how many drops do you see installing? And the interesting thing that we found, this was kind of surprising, year over year we actually saw people predicting an increase in the number of drops. As you can see there, the amount that thought that they would be installing 4 drops or more went from 8 to 15% between the 2012 and the 2013 survey. And the folks that are only doing 1 dropped from 16 to 11%. So I'm not going to claim that this was a scientifically constructed study and we can accurately predict a 7% increase. But I think what I do feel comfortable saying is that there's not a steady decline predicted by this. So that makes you wonder, so why? If wireless is growing, if wireless is increasing in capabilities and improving bandwidths and speeds, why are the number of drops not decreasing? Well, we think one of those reasons is POE, which James is going to talk about again in a couple of minutes.
All right, sorry. So even though POE at the workstation is already fairly common, the market feels like it's going to go up. So if you look at the pie chart on the left, it kind of shows where we are right now. A lot of people are using POE, and probably most of that is the IP phones that probably a lot of people have on their desk that they're using right now. In the future, 1 to 3 years, people expect that to go even higher, probably with more of that, with more of many things. And that's what we're going to talk about with kind of what the status is with POE. Sorry. So this just kind of shows the history of where POE's been and where it's going. The first iteration of POE came out early 2000s, AF at 13 watts. A lot of this was really for IP phones and very limited power that you could use. Then a few years ago, they came out with an AT that basically doubled that power, where we can go up to 600 milliamps per pair. Right now, in the state of the POE world, there are what we call standards compliant, which do comply to the AT, and then non-standards with what people have come out with really devices that use more than that 30 watts of power, and we'll talk about how they get that. So what you can see from this chart is some of the applications that are out there in the world right now that people are already using that are above that 30 watts that the IEEE standard governs right now. So you can see nurse call systems, point-of-sale devices, building management, video conferencing. All those things require a little bit more power. So all these are great things. You can use your structured cabling, and everybody knows that from the old standards that you can use Cat5e cabling, and there's no problems as far as the power. But what we've started to see as the power gets higher, that there's some heating effect in the cable. If you have many cables powered, if you have large bundles, if you are in enclosed spaces, you'll start to have some heating effects. So about 3 years ago, TIA came out with recommendations and guidelines on how big of bundles you should use on different types of cabling with different types of power to not go over the heat rating of your cable. So all the data cables that you use have some type of cable rating, a temperature rating of the cable, like 60 degrees is usually what you see, some 75 degrees and some higher than that. So what the TIA TSB basically gives you guidelines to not increase the power or the temperature of that cable over that maximum temperature rise, so you shouldn't have problems with that. But as you can see, if you go higher and higher with power, the more temperature the more heat that you can have built up. So what we're seeing trends are, if you look at the bottom of that, there's actually the HDBaseT, which is a very new technology where they're transmitting power and that HD signal over twisted pair. You can get up to 100 watts, which obviously, if you're on the right, the amperage is much higher. So the temperature rise on those type of products are going to be something that's going to be looked at in the future. One of our reactions to this has been to study, obviously, the effects of temperature on that and come out with possibilities, products that customers can look at if they're looking at higher powered solutions, bigger bundles, enclosed spaces, cables that will give you better heat performance over that higher power range. And if you want information about these, this will be on Graybar's website. We actually have a display where we show the heating effects at Dixie that you can see in Orlando next month.
So then bringing that back to drops, what does that mean? Overall, because we think the potential that POE has and how, General Cable and other manufacturers, I'm sure, are responding to that need, the increased power that end-use devices are drawing. We think that, drops to the workstation will probably increase slightly over the next decade. We modeled, roughly a 1% to 2% tailwind or positive effect on structure cable because of drops mainly driven by POE. So the next, kind of new technology or emerging solution that we wanted to address was fiber. Fiber has been around for some time. It is, right now I'd classify as heavily a data center solution. But we wanted to test the appetite of the market to switch to a fiber solution as data demands continue to increase. What we've seen looking historically is that fiber has really hovered at around 4 to 5% of market penetration for some time now. It seems like it's kind of maxed out. So we wanted to validate this, kind of to see if this trend was going to continue into the future. So we asked our customer base, what is your current horizontal solution to get data to the desktop? And that's where we got the 4%. And the next question we asked was, if copper becomes obsolete, what are you going to do? And I know that's not a likely situation, but we were trying to tease out, where's the next solution in terms of providing data. And what we found that, the leap is going to come to wireless, not necessarily fiber. And I think that really speaks to just some of the challenges that most of you on the call know already, which is the difficulty installing fiber and the cost challenges inherent in converting signals. Our perspective is the reason why fiber has kind of leveled off at that 4 or 5% range is that it's twofold, really. So over the years, as the cable industry has continued to improve performance, going from Category 3 to 5 to 5E to 6 to 6A, we are really shrinking that performance gap between a fiber solution at 40 gig and now a 6A copper solution at 10 gig. And there's even future high bandwidth copper solutions on the horizon. And second, manufacturers have relentlessly been taking cost out of the product. So we've not only been reducing the performance gap, we've kind of been, broadening or increasing the cost gap. So we've really been, I think, doing a great job at keeping fiber as a solution for data centers, but not so much in the structured environment. So overall, we think there will be probably slow conversion, as you got folks on the margin who are consuming lots and lots of data and are willing to make the investment. We put adoption at about 1% a year for fiber. So when we try to crunch all this together, the so what of what we're talking about today, we look back at the trends and kind of look again at that 2005 to 2010 period. We think that fiber and wireless already had the step change or forklift effect that you'd expect. We think that's what was going on in the last half of the first decade of the century. Category cables maxed out in 2005, but the economy continued to grow. It really wasn't the crisis. The crisis didn't really hit until 2008, 2009, so that decline has to be due to something. And we think that's the time when wireless and fiber began drawing a significant portion of the structured market. And as we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, I think we've reached equilibrium. Future shifts from copper to new technologies will be slower, on the margins, 1% or 2% here and there, rather than systemic like we saw back in 2005 to 10. So we put a little bit of modeling behind this, and we combined the impact of the macroeconomy, assuming we're going to grow at 1% or 2%. You'd expect that growth to transfer over to the category market. Wireless, as James discussed, we expect that to gradually pull 2, 3, 4% away from structured cable on an annual basis. We think PoE is going to be an enabling technology, which is going to provide 1% or 2% lift to the structured cable market. And then fiber, as we just discussed, we feel is going to be a slight depressor, take a little bit away, but is not a major threat. You kind of add all those up together, and we arrive at the 1% decline of the copper category market. And that really, the last 4 or 5 years, I think, proves that out. General Cable saw basically flat sales in copper category cables in 2014. We don't see anything on the horizon that's going to prove any differently this year. So we feel pretty good with these projections. So just to wrap up, before handing it back over to Carl, just kind of reiterate what we talked about a half an hour ago. We think the future for the structured cable market and copper category cables is strong. The 80% of the market that today is using a fiber, a Cat5 or a Cat6 solution, and really the technological capabilities of the installed base to get users what they need, that has staying power. And then when you add on things like power over Ethernet and the additional capabilities that provides, those things are going to offset some of the shifts that we will see on the margin to things like wireless and fiber. And that's our perspective. At that, I'd like to turn it back over to Carl.
Great. Thank you very much, Matt and James, for the information you gave us today. It's wonderful. I wanted to remind everybody that we are entering our Q&A period. At the bottom of your screen is a Q&A button. If you'll click that button, a dialog box will open up. You can type your question there. We'll restate the questions so everybody can hear them, and then we'll ask Matt and James to respond to those questions. Before we go to that Q&A, while you're thinking about it and typing your question in, I wanted to remind you that this entire presentation is archived or will be archived by tomorrow on Graybar.com. Just click on the G2 Talk webinar logo on Graybar's home screen or home page and click on the archive, and you'll be able to get it there. A copy of the presentation will be there. I know several of you have already typed that question in about wanting to know about a copy of the presentation, and it will be up there in PDF format. While people are typing in their questions, Matt and James, I've got a couple of my own, if you don't mind, as to kind of help move things forward. My first one is this: are you planning to do another survey in 2015?
We've talked about that, and I think it's something we'll do either 2015 or 2016, absolutely, because like James mentioned, with the really strong growth in the AC standard and what that's pushing out in the market, we believe that it's important to keep a pulse, so absolutely in the next 2 years we'll be reaching out again.
The second question I have is when we talk about 802.11 AC, as that technology moves forward from a wireless perspective, we know that many of those access points for 802.11 AC have 2 ports on them. And you mentioned in your presentation that you may need multiple cables or a different kind of cable to reach the maximum potential there for 802.11 AC. If I'm not mistaken, that 802.11 AC comes in 2 flavors. The version 1 is out right now, but the version 2 will not be available for a little while. What is actually going on with these 2 versions of 802.11 AC?
I can't really answer the wireless standards. I know there's differences in the antennas and how many antennas it uses and kind of the technology and how it directs the signals. But as far as, I think the biggest thing for us is that this technology is faster than 1 gigabit, and what are you going to use for your cabling infrastructure to do that?
Exactly.
From a speed perspective, if I'm not mistaken, wave 1 was a little over 1 gig, and the second wave is going to be in the 2 to 3 range, is what I've seen.
Okay, great. When we talk about PoE, which is very interesting, and there seems to be a lot of discussion here in the last several months or maybe 6 months about the HDBaseT standard, where we can do HDMI over twisted pair and what goes along with that. The PoE slide showed 100 watts, and is that sufficient power to drive a display, number one? And when will PoE at 100 watts, when do you think it might be available? Or is it available today?
So the reason I believe that the IEEE group has taken a long time to come out with this new standard is it started out with PoE in its current form sends the power across 2 of the pairs out of the 4. The new BT was going to just double that and send it across 4. So you would get basically the same effect on the cabling, but you'd get double the power because you're using all 4 pair. But what they've done is, because of the proliferation of all these devices, they're now expanding this and trying to figure out what that maximum wattage that you can send over the cable, still be safe, and support the items that people need. The HDBaseT is interesting because Samsung, you can go on the internet and look at Samsung HDBaseT, and you'll see they're already offering solutions that talk about using 4-pair Ethernet, just 1 cable hooking it up to a television and getting your power and your HD across that 4-pair Ethernet cable. And their requirements or their maximum power is 100 watts. So the issue that we have, or that as an industry, is what happens when you bundle those with a lot of cables. And that's really where the safety issues come in.
Okay. There's several questions up here that's from various folks, more than one. So I'll kind of lump them together for you to respond. And that has to do about the charts in your presentation. There wasn't information up there, or wasn't called out about STP, shielded twisted pair, STP, or Category 7. Were those included in the presentation, or do you have any comments about STP Category 7, and what about what's going on with this Category 8 thing? Could we kind of elaborate on maybe kind of all 3 of those in one question, sort of?
Well, I know in North America at least, what our perspective on Cat 7, that we don't make a lot of Cat 7, and obviously we don't sell a lot of Cat 7, so that would probably, if you had to include in any of those numbers, it would, from our perspective, it would be in the 6A category. As far as Cat 8, and I don't know if everybody on the call is familiar with Category 8, but they have actually come out with the name of the new category that will support 40 GBaseT, and we'll be calling it Cat 8. Our perspective, and actually the fact that Cat 8 is a 30-meter channel, so it's not a 100-meter channel that we use for all the other categories. So the applications that you could use Category 8 are going to be very, very small, at least from a structured horizontal cabling aspect. Obviously, in a server or data center room, that's more applicable to where you're going to use the Cat 8 cabling. So, and even those standards, they're still being written and probably won't be done until the end of this year.
There's a couple. Thank you. There's a couple questions up here about Category 5E supporting 1 gig. Could you respond to that?
So the quick answer would be yes. I mean, if you have good Category 5E that passes 5E permanent link and channel, it would support 1GBaseT. Without getting into the history of how that came about, 5 manufacturers have come a long way in their noise cancellation techniques and those type of things where they can overcome maybe issues that we had years ago when we were developing 1 gig.
So the obvious follow-up to that question is the advantages of 6 and 6A, please.
So Category 6 obviously gets you more headroom over 5E. You have better return loss. You have better insertion loss, better ACRF, less signal loss. Again, 6A is really the monumental leap between 5E, from 1GBaseT to 10 gig. Cat 6 gets you 10 gig in limited length. There are situations where you can run Cat 6 and get 10 gig if you have the right application and the right setup. So 6A gets you 10GBaseT. You couldn't get a 10GBaseT speeds on or 10 gigabit per second speeds over Cat 5e cabling.
And I think the advantage that comes along with 6A is just the ability to future-proof your installation. So, not needing to go back into the walls in 7 or 8 years if your user decides they want to upgrade to 10 gig.
And as we're finding out now with the higher power requirements for PoE, you get much more capability purely from an electricity standpoint with resistances that are lower with your Cat 6 cable and your Cat 6A cable.
Several times David asked this question, and I want to pass it along to you all. In your presentation a couple of times you mentioned wireless to the desktop. How do you define that?
I mean, I define it, and I'm sure most people would, is if you had a laptop at your desktop, instead of hooking an Ethernet cable to it, you're using your wireless access point.
Right. So if it wasn't a laptop, using a tablet for your work at the desktop and maybe using a cellular connection as opposed to an in-building connection on the network, is that also considered wireless to the desktop?
Yeah, so we're not separating Wi-Fi from cellular. Those would be considered the same.
All right. Chaz or Charles asked a question about on the survey and maybe in future surveys, is there any information you could provide about the geographical regions around the country in terms of use of cable? Do you find 6A is more popular on the West Coast than the Midwest, for example, or something like that? Is there any geographical data that you might have?
Yeah, in terms of the survey, there's not, I wouldn't say we had enough responses to pull out anything meaningful geographically, but just from, kind of the day-to-day, we definitely see 6A heavy on the coasts. The eastern market, New York, New Jersey, as well as California, I would say, are the 2 hot spots where that conversion is most prevalent. But we do see pockets. Education has been big recently for us in terms of 6A, and I think you're seeing the future-proofing side of the 10 gig solution there. So yeah, I would say on the coasts and then across the board in the education vertical or where we'd see 6A.
There's several questions up here, more than one, about TAA standards. Where are we at in terms of getting an upgrade to what we currently have from IEEE with TAA standards for structured cabling? Does anybody know?
Yeah, so the TAA, the TSB that was written in 2009 is to support the AT, which is the current finished standard, the BT, which is the new, possibly up to 100 watts. TIA is also working on an update to that standard right now that should come out about the same time as the IEEE standard.
So what time is your prediction for that to occur?
Well, I just looked at the timeline for because I'm sure somebody was going to ask about IEEE's timeline, and they have actually not till the beginning of 2017 for publishing. But obviously, once the momentum gets in place, the people that are on IEEE are the people that are making these things, so they know when they can start to make these devices. You should start seeing devices, within the next year, I would say.
Okay. Well, we're running up against the clock. We have one more question here, and then I wanted to let everybody know that we would respond to all of these questions via email. We appreciate your participation in today's webinar. So the last question is this that David brought up, and that has to do about the cost decrease in terms of copper, and how does that translate into changes in the market? Was that considered in the study? If the price of copper goes up, if the price of cable gets a little bit higher, do we see dramatic moves towards wireless and fiber, or is the low cost of cable due to low copper prices right now, is that an anomaly? Is that factored into any of the data you provided today?
No, we didn't explicitly look at the change in copper, which was, back the left-hand portion of the charts we showed, probably in the $1 or $2 per pound range, where it's up around $2.50 or $3 now. Just anecdotally, from a market perspective, it is a dynamic. We do everything we can to make sure that the cost savings are passed on to our customers, but it's not. If you have experience in the heavier copper products on the industrial side or the utility side, there's just not as much copper content in a box of category cable. So it's not a huge driver of cost, but it is definitely an element.
And my editorial to the presentation had to do with the comments that were made somewhere around slide 27 or 28 that had to do about the number of drops or an increase or decrease in the number of drops at the desktop. And, my comment to that, and maybe you would want to respond to this, is about it's always good to have good economic factors that show increases in construction. And when we talk about building life cycles in terms of building them and renovating them, as the economy improves, more buildings get built, more buildings get renovated, and also when buildings are renovated is a prime opportunity then to do an upgrade in terms of communications infrastructure in those buildings. So I was very encouraged to see the economic conditions being part of your report, and I thank you for that. And if you wanted to add a comment on that, we'll make that the last comment and we'll close out.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think just the kind of the gradual but continued improvement in the economy we've seen over the last couple of years, if you take kind of the mini fits and starts out of it, are encouraging. It's exciting that maybe we're getting out of this 5 or 6 year slog we've been in, and really kind of entering a stage where we're going to see some of that growth return.
Great. I want to thank you both for the time that you spent with us today. The information you provided us in terms of industry data to help us understand a little bit more about what's going on in the marketplace from a structured cabling perspective is very valuable. I know it was valuable to the Graybar employees that may have been on this call, but it's also valuable to those others that were out here, whether you're a user or an installer. Great information. We want to thank you very much. I want to remind everybody that if you're one of the first 50 up and staying with us, you get a coupon for a cup of coffee, so check your email for that. I wanted to remind everybody that we will respond to the questions that we didn't answer, and those we probably did. We'll respond to you via email with the answers to those questions and let you know that the presentation is archived, and you'll be able to go up there, copy the URL, and share it with your friends and colleagues, but you can also get a printed copy of the PDF of the presentation. Matt and James, thank you very much for your time. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We'll see you next month for another G2 Talk webinar. Have a great day.